There are moments in life that quietly rewrite who you are. One of those moments arrives when someone who controlled you finally realizes they cannot reach you anymore. And that moment does not arrive as anger. It does not arrive as rage. It arrives as silence, a strange quiet, a confused stillness on their end. Because for the first time since they walked into your life, the fuel they were feeding on has been cut off completely. The mirror they were staring into has gone dark, and the person they used to drain is now standing somewhere they cannot touch. What happens inside them after that is something most people will never understand unless they have actually lived it. Because the human being who once made you feel small, replaced, invisible, and slowly insane begins to orbit you in ways they cannot even explain to themselves. And that orbit, that quiet, obsessive gravitational pull they develop toward the version of you they can no longer access, is what people loosely call becoming your slave until death. Not in any literal sense, not in any physical sense, but in the psychological sense, in the sense that their nervous system becomes permanently tethered to the absence of you. Before I take you deeper into what this really means and how it works inside the mind of a controlling personality, I need you to do one small thing. Subscribe to this channel, because what we talk about here is not surface level. This is the kind of psychological awareness that rewires the way you see every difficult relationship you have ever survived. And you deserve to be reminded of these truths every single week. So subscribe now and stay with me, because what comes next is going to land somewhere very deep inside you. Understand this clearly. A self-centered person does not love you. A self-centered person consumes you. And the difference between those two things is the difference between being chosen and being harvested. You were never a partner to them. You were a resource, a controlled source of emotional fuel that kept their fragile inner world from collapsing in on itself. And the reason they seemed so intensely drawn to you at the beginning was not because they saw your soul. It was because they sensed your supply, your empathy, your willingness to explain yourself, your tendency to overfunction, your habit of staying calm while they spiraled, your gift for absorbing chaos and turning it into peace. All of that was currency to them, and they spent it freely because they believed it would never run out. But something happens inside a person who has been used like this for too long. Something quiet, something almost sacred. You begin to feel a kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix, a kind of loneliness that their presence makes worse, a kind of confusion that no conversation with them can resolve. And that exhaustion is not weakness. That exhaustion is your nervous system finally telling you the truth. Your mind has been too loyal to admit that this person is not safe, that this person was never safe, and that no amount of love poured into them will ever fill the hole they were born carrying. The shift begins the moment you stop explaining yourself, the moment you stop chasing clarity from someone whose entire power depends on keeping you confused, the moment you stop reacting to the bait, the silent treatment, the sudden warmth, the manufactured crisis, the triangulation, the rewriting of history, the mind games that made you question whether your own memory could even be trusted. The moment you stop participating in the emotional economy they built around your pain, something extraordinary happens. You become unreadable to them. And an unreadable target is a terrifying thing to a self-absorbed person, because their entire sense of self is built through the reactions of other people. They do not have a stable inner identity. They have a performance, and that performance demands an audience. And you, for years, were the most reliable audience they had ever found. You clapped when they needed applause. You cried when they needed power. You apologized when they needed innocence. You stayed when they needed proof that they were lovable. And the second you stop doing any of that, the entire stage collapses, and they are left standing in a spotlight with no script, no reaction, no mirror, just the unbearable echo of their own emptiness. This is where the so-called slavery begins. And hear me carefully, this is metaphorical, this is psychological. This is internal. No one becomes anyone's literal property. What actually happens is far more interesting and far more permanent. The controlling person becomes obsessed with the version of you they can no longer manipulate. They become haunted by your calm, by your distance, by your refusal to argue, by the strange new softness in your voice that no longer carries fear. They start watching you from afar. They start asking mutual friends about you. They start showing up in places they know you might be. They start sending messages that seem random but are carefully engineered to test whether the door is still open. And even when you do not respond, especially when you do not respond, the obsession deepens because nothing destabilizes them more deeply than a former source of supply who has discovered self-respect. You become the unsolved problem of their life, the one person they could not break, the one mirror that walked away while still intact. And that unresolved emotional wound stays with them in a way no new relationship, no new supply, no new performance can ever fully cover. They will replace you on the surface quickly, sometimes shockingly quickly. But underneath that replacement is a quiet, gnawing, lifelong awareness that you were the one who saw them clearly and chose to leave anyway. And that awareness is the chain they will carry until the day they die. Now, I need you to understand why this works, because if you do not understand the mechanism, you will be tempted to break it. You will be tempted to check on them, to explain one more time, to give one more chance, to answer one more message. And every time you do that, you reset the whole process. Listen carefully. Self-absorbed people are addicted to emotional reactivity. Your pain is their proof of significance. Your anger is their evidence of power. Your tears are their validation of importance. Even your hatred is fuel, because hatred still means they occupy space inside your mind. The only thing that genuinely starves them is your indifference. Real indifference. Not performed indifference. Not loud indifference. Not the kind you announce on social media, but the deep, settled, almost spiritual indifference of someone who has finally understood that this person is not a mystery to be solved, but a pattern to be released. And when you reach that level of quiet stillness, you stop being a person to them and start being a wound. A permanent psychological wound they cannot lick closed, and that is the wound that follows them into every future bedroom, every future argument, every future quiet night when they cannot sleep and do not know why. If this is reaching something inside you that has been waiting a long time to be named, take a breath and subscribe to this channel before you go any further, because the work of unlearning the relational patterns that made you available to a manipulator in the first place is not a single video. It is a slow, deliberate reconstruction of how you relate to yourself. And I want to be a steady voice in that reconstruction. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and let this be one of the spaces where your healing is treated with the seriousness it deserves. And now, let us go even deeper, because the next part is the part most people miss. The reason you were chosen is not the reason you think. You were not chosen because you were weak. You were chosen because you were strong in a very specific way. You were chosen because you had a deep capacity for loyalty, for forgiveness, for seeing the wounded child inside other people. You were chosen because you were the kind of person who could love someone through their worst behavior and still believe in their best self. And that quality, which in a healthy relationship would have been treasured, in this relationship was exploited. And now that you are walking away, you have to do something very difficult. You have to stop punishing yourself for the very traits that make you a beautiful human being. Your empathy was not the problem. Your empathy aimed at the wrong target was the problem. Your love was not the problem. Your love poured into a container with no bottom was the problem. And the work now is not to harden yourself, not to become cold, not to become the kind of person who can never be hurt again. The work is to become discerning, to keep your softness but guard your gates, to keep your warmth but verify who is worthy of it, to keep your capacity for deep love but understand that depth is a privilege, not a right. And that privilege is something people earn through consistency, accountability, and emotional safety, not through charm, intensity, or trauma bonding. And here is the truth almost no one tells you. The longer you stay in your own peace, the more the manipulator deteriorates. Not because you are doing anything to them, but because you are no longer doing anything for them. You are no longer regulating their emotions. You are no longer stabilizing their identity. You are no longer absorbing their projections. You are no longer translating their cruelty into something forgivable. And without you performing all of that invisible labor, they are forced to encounter themselves. And a self-absorbed person encountering themselves without a buffer is one of the most psychologically painful experiences a human being can undergo, which is why they will do almost anything to avoid it. Including circling back to you years later with apologies that sound rehearsed because they are, with insights that sound borrowed because they are, with promises that sound desperate because they are. And the test of your healing will not be whether you feel nothing in that moment. The test of your healing will be whether you can feel something and still not move, whether you can acknowledge the history and still close the door, whether you can wish them well in the abstract and still refuse them access in the concrete. And that quiet, unshakable no is the moment you become free in a way they will never be. You have to understand the loneliness of the manipulator to fully grasp what you are walking away from. Beneath the arrogance, beneath the contempt, beneath the cold eyes and the cutting words is a person who has never once experienced genuine intimacy, not with you, not with anyone, not even with themselves. Because intimacy requires the one thing they cannot tolerate, which is being seen without performance. And since they cannot tolerate it, they sabotage it everywhere it appears, which means every relationship they will ever have, including the one they enter after you, will be a variation of the same hollow choreography. Different partner, same emptiness. Different stage, same script. And somewhere inside them, in a place they will rarely admit even to themselves, they know this. And that knowing is the quiet hell they carry. And your absence becomes the loudest reminder of that hell because you were the one who almost reached them, the one who came closest to cracking the performance, the one whose love was real enough to expose how fake everything else has been. And that is why, in the deepest psychological sense, they never fully let you go. Not because they love you the way you understand love, but because you became the symbol of the life they could have had if they had been brave enough to be human. So before this lands its final blow, subscribe one more time if you have not already, because the person you are becoming on the other side of this awareness deserves a community, deserves a steady stream of reminders, deserves to be surrounded by voices that will not manipulate them back into smallness. And this channel is built for exactly that. So subscribe, share this with the one person in your life who needs to hear it. And let us continue because we are not done. Not even close. The final shift, the deepest shift, the shift that changes everything is when you stop wanting them to understand. You stop wanting the apology, you stop wanting the recognition, you stop wanting them to finally see what they did because you realize that their understanding was never the doorway to your freedom. Your understanding was, and the day you no longer need them to validate your reality is the day their power over you ends completely. And from that day forward, whatever they do, whatever they say, whatever performance they stage to pull you back into the orbit, lands on a different person. A person who has rebuilt her nervous system from the inside out. A person who has learned that peace is not boring, that calm is not emptiness, that stability is not the absence of love, but the presence of safety. And that person, the person you are becoming right now as you listen to this, is someone the manipulator will study for the rest of their life and never fully comprehend because you will have done the one thing they were never able to do. You will have chosen yourself fully, quietly, irreversibly. And that choice, that single choice repeated every day in 1,000 small ways, is the chain that binds them to the memory of you forever while you walk further and further into a life they can no longer touch. And somewhere out there, in a quiet moment they did not plan for, in a room that suddenly feels too still, in a silence they cannot fill with new supply, they will think of you and they will not know why their chest hurts, and they will not know why nothing tastes the same, and they will not know why every mirror they look into now shows them something they have spent their entire life running from, and you will be somewhere else entirely. Breathing differently, loving differently, existing differently, no longer waiting, no longer explaining, no longer translating yourself for someone who is never going to read the language of your soul. And the further you walk, the more they will feel it. And the more they feel it, the more they will reach. And the more they reach, the more clearly you will see that you were never the one who needed them. You were the one they could not survive without knowing. And somewhere in the quiet architecture of that truth, a door is opening inside you that has been locked since long before they ever arrived. And on the other side of that door is a version of you that has been waiting patiently, lifetimes maybe, for you to finally stop bleeding for people who were never going to bandage you. And as you step toward her, as you feel her reach back, as you begin to understand that everything you survived was preparing you for this exact moment of return home to yourself, please subscribe to this channel and share this video with the one person you know who needs to hear it today, because you never know whose life is quietly waiting for words exactly like these. Stay safe out there and keep walking toward the version of you that nothing and no one can ever take away again. And I want to remind you one more time before we close this chapter together. Healing is not a destination you arrive at one morning when the sun finally decides to shine. Healing is the moment you wake up and realize you did not dream about them again. Healing is walking past their favorite place and feeling nothing in your chest. Healing is hearing their name in a crowded room and noticing your shoulders did not flinch. Healing is sitting in silence without filling it with apology. And healing is forgiving yourself for every single time you thought the love you gave should have magically made them safe. It was never your job to save them. That was never written into your contract with them. Your only job was to survive the version of them that was never going to change unless they decided to, and they did not decide to. That is not your failure. That is their unfinished business with their own reflection. And if you ever find yourself wondering whether leaving was the right thing to do, remember this. You did not leave a person. You left a pattern that was slowly erasing your name from your own mouth. You left a silence they kept mistaking for peace. You left a stage where you were always cast as the supporting actor in your own story. And the day you left, you finally got the lead role back. So let me leave you with this last truth before you close this tab. A manipulator cannot heal what you have healed because healing requires the very thing they refuse to do. It requires honesty. It requires accountability. It requires sitting alone in a room and saying out loud, I was wrong, I hurt people, I do not know how to love, without controlling it. And that confession is something they will keep running away from until they run out of rooms to hide inside. But you do not have to wait for that day anymore. Yours has already arrived. You are already standing in the sun. You are already breathing cleaner air. You are already becoming the version of you they always feared you could be. So keep going. Keep protecting the peace you built with your own bare hands. Keep choosing yourself again and again in the smallest quiet moments of your ordinary day. Subscribe now if this stirred something inside you that has been silent for too long. Share it with someone walking their own road back to themselves. And until we meet again in the next video, keep choosing you. Because that quiet choice is the loudest rebellion you will ever make against every person who tried to convince you that you were less than you actually are.